kind of create a list of questions, and then we'll move again into district level breakout sessions. When you come back from your breaks, if you're not in a breakout room right away, be patient. We have a really large group of people. Christy McWhorter is our amazing tech person, but she's one person. So she's going to be working really hard and fast to get people into breaks. I do want to give you a quick caveat about guidance before we get started. If you haven't noticed, it changes rapidly as the science changes. And so what you learn today may not be, it may change in the next coming weeks or months. And in fact, I think I know there is a FAQ coming out to clarify some of it next week or the week after from DOH and LNI. So just know that this is a changing situation. And Barb and I are always there at the ESD to help you and get the best, most recent guidance for you as we move forward through this. I want to quickly introduce Barb Peoples. I'm Lynn Nelson. I didn't introduce myself. I'm the Director of Health Services and Student Support at ESD 113. Barb Peoples is joining me here today. You can see her because she has a background that matches mine. Barb is our Health Services Manager. So we've put this together for you, but really it's our speakers who are going to do the majority of the presentation today. Okay, so I want to introduce to you first Dr. Maria Hong. She is representing the American Academy of Pediatrics today, the Washington chapter. She's a local pediatrician. And Dr. Hong, I'll let you share your screen. Are you able to do that?
Okay, let me see.
And again, if everybody else would mute themselves, and then any questions that come up during these presentations, type them into the chat box. And at the end of each of the 4 presentations, we'll get them answered for you.
All right, is that screen sharing?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Well, again, my name is Maria Huang. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak today. Just a quick background about me. I did my residency at Seattle Children's, and I've been working in the Thurston and Lewis County areas for the last 10 years as a general pediatrician. So briefly, I have no financial disclosures, and I want to thank the Washington chapter of the AAP for use of several of their slides today in this talk. And as Lynn mentioned, I just want to focus on the caveat that, again, our knowledge about COVID is constantly evolving. There are still many, many unknowns. So with that being said, we'll talk just quickly about the objectives for the talk today. I'll go over the AAP and the CDC guidelines for reopening schools this fall, touch briefly on the COVID presentation in children, and talk about what, as pediatricians, we're trying to do to keep kids healthy in and out of schools. So this first slide is a compilation of the OSPI, the Academy of Pediatrics, and the CDC recommendations for opening schools this fall. So part of that will include modifying drop-off and pickup procedures, and that will probably look like staggering times, so we're avoiding large groups of parents congregating to pick up and drop off kids. Health screenings, so this will probably involve some sort of temperature check of the students, the staff, and teachers. So either at the school or asking parents to take kids' temperatures before heading off to school, and having a way to ask screening questions. So has your child been sick with fever greater than 100.4 degrees? Do they have cough, shortness of breath? Have they been around anybody with a positive COVID test? Physical distancing, this will probably involve spacing desks, having students eat their lunch in the classroom instead of large groups in the cafeteria, and avoiding big groups congregating in hallways, so not having classes move around, but having kids stay in one classroom, and perhaps having teachers move instead. Cleaning and disinfecting regularly. I think one of our other presenters will be touching on that. So just briefly on that, we do know that transmission of COVID on surfaces is much, much lower than transmission airborne. So even though cleaning and disinfecting is very important, we do know that transmission on surfaces is pretty low. That being said, we know that ventilation and having air circulating definitely decreases transmission rates. So keeping windows open on buses, windows open in school buildings, and if practical and feasible, even having kids having class outdoors. Again, that's only on nice days, but these are ideas to just reduce the transmission of COVID in the building. A lot of what drives what we're going to do this fall depends on testing availability and contact tracing. So this is also something that is evolving and will change throughout the summer. I think we all know about hygiene practice, so washing hands and covering coughs and sneezes, encouraging kids not to touch their face constantly, and then wearing of cloth mask coverings. So I think this will probably be the most difficult procedure to maintain in kids. And I know that there's a lot of posts going around out between parents and on Facebook about possible dangers and harm in wearing masks, and that is simply not true. There is ample evidence out there about the benefits to others when we wear cloth face coverings. So obviously it'll be hard to get kids to do this. And I think there's a handout that Lynn's given about ways to encourage kids to keep masks on. One of the important things is just giving them the freedom to choose the design on their masks or to decorate and make it more personal for them. And just normalizing it, showing kids pictures of other kids wearing masks, of adults wearing masks. And I think for the older kids, just explaining to them why we are doing what we're doing. So this next slide shows our social and civic responsibilities, again, to protect others and the most vulnerable. So this slide just shows if you take an individual who is sick and has COVID, and they do not wear a mask, the risk to a healthy individual who is wearing the mask is still very high, up to 70%. Now, if you take that sick individual and put a mask on them, the transmission risk to a healthy individual, even without wearing a mask, has dropped significantly to about 5%. And if both the sick and the healthy individuals are wearing masks, that transmission risk is about 1.5%. So again, clear evidence that masking is extremely helpful and beneficial. So just transitioning into what does COVID look like in kids? The symptoms are pretty similar to adults, but tend to be a lot milder. Fever, chills, kind of cough, nausea, vomiting. What we're seeing in kids tends to be more GI symptoms like nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, and less of the fever. But these are the most common symptoms. Symptoms like fatigue, muscle aches, loss of appetite, taste or smell tend to be less common presentations in kids. I know this syndrome, MIS, the multi-system inflammatory syndrome in children, is getting a lot of press. And it is a very serious illness, and involves inflammation of multiple organs in the body. And we don't know a whole lot about it yet, but we do know that most of the kids who are presenting with MIS-C have been around someone with COVID or have had themselves the illness. And usually it's presenting about 3 or 4 weeks after exposure. What I really want to focus on, though, is the fact that this is extremely rare. So COVID in kids is rare, and MIS-C in children is even more rare. And to date, we've only seen 4 cases reported in Washington. So just briefly, the signs and symptoms of MIS-C, basically, they're similar to COVID, but these kids are sick. There's no question about the severity, and often these kids are going to present to the ER, and there won't be any watching and waiting. So these kids will present pretty ill. So as Lynn said, the research is constantly evolving, but some of the good news is that we've seen in recent published articles, in fact, 2 days ago in the journal Nature, they had an study out that showed that kids under 20 are roughly half as susceptible to COVID infection as those over 20 years of age. And age really does matter. So the youngest kids, the groups 0 to 5-year-olds, seem to be less likely to be infected compared to the older 16 to 18-year-olds. But again, the whole cohort of under 20 individuals tends to be less likely to get COVID. And then also in terms of transmission, about 2 weeks ago, there was a published article from data from 6 countries that children tend to be less likely to transmit COVID, either to other children or to adults. And again, this data was obtained when schools were closed. So although it is very positive, we still don't know exactly what will happen when schools do open up again. But again, all good news for kids. So just briefly, what we're doing as pediatricians to keep kids healthy, not only in schools, but out of schools. The Academy of Pediatrics has launched a campaign called Call Your Pediatrician. So we really want to get kids back into the office and checking in with them, making sure they're healthy both physically and mentally. So what our offices have been doing are changing procedures just to keep our staff healthy and to keep our families and patients healthy. So we have been open, our offices, throughout the pandemic, and we've made some changes like eliminating waiting rooms. We have families call when they get to the parking lot, and a nurse goes out and screens them and brings them directly into the office. So we have eliminated the risks of germs in waiting rooms. We've designated certain areas. So at our office, we have a building that is the well building and a building that is the sick building. Other clinics that don't have that luxury have had well visits in the morning and then thoroughly clean the office and then bring sick kids in the afternoon. Another thing we've started is telehealth visits. So families that still may have some trepidation about coming in, we can still touch base with them via Zoom and other platforms. So one of our big concerns is that we know immunization rates have dropped significantly during this pandemic, and that has made us worry about what we could see in the next coming months, which is outbreaks of measles and pertussis. So we know 80 million babies around the world are at higher risk of vaccine preventable diseases as the pandemic has kind of slowed vaccine programs. So in Washington, we know that rates for immunizations have dropped by 42% in April of this year compared to last year. And throughout the US, in Michigan and California, we have similar rates. So I've included this quote by the WHO Director General. I'm not going to try to pronounce his name, but immunization is one of the most powerful and fundamental tools to prevent disease in the history of public health. So I strongly agree with this quote, and we really want to get our kids back in and vaccinated. And lastly, not only do we focus on physical health, but behavioral health too, and mental health. So we know kids thrive on routine and schedule, and that has been completely thrown out the window. So we know kids are feeling anxious, depressed, overwhelmed, and this can manifest as physical complaints, having trouble sleeping, stomach aches, headaches. So again, we want to get kids in so we can just support them physically, mentally, and support their families during this time. So I'll just conclude with a few take-home points. The good news again is that it seems like with evidence so far that children are less likely to be infected with COVID and less likely to transmit the virus. Again, great news for reopening schools this fall. But still, as I said earlier, this data was based on when schools were closed. So we still don't know kind of what will happen. And so we don't know the least we can get away with. I think some people might be saying, hey, maybe we don't need to mask then. The risk in kids is low, but we don't know what we can get away with, but we do know what works. So masking, physical distancing, good hygiene, we know these things have flattened the curve. So again, research, knowledge still evolving, so things are likely to change in the weeks to come. And so hopefully we can just be flexible and patient, although I know patience is running low during this time. But also, I think just being kind to ourselves, being kind to one another, and really thinking about our social and civic responsibilities to protecting others, to protecting the most vulnerable. So that's the end of my presentation. Thanks again for allowing me to speak, and I'm happy to take questions.
Right, Maria, we have a couple questions in the chat box. The OSPI guidance speaks to some exceptions for wearing masks. Do you have more guidance on how to make those determinations for staff or for students?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we definitely don't recommend masks in kids under 2 years old. And I think it's going to be, I guess, a kind of moving target. So we know that there are kids out there who have sensory issues, who have autism, who have behavioral health issues, and asking them to wear a mask will just not be feasible. So I think that's something to discuss with these kids' doctors about, is this even going to be a possibility? But that is an important question. And already in our clinic, we've had families come in asking, can we get a note so my child doesn't need to wear a mask? And that really needs to be looked at as a case-by-case basis. But yes, in general, some overarching principles are kids under 2, anyone with kind of autism, sensory issues, who wearing a mask will be very difficult, should not be wearing a mask.
All right, thank you. Are masks better than shields?
So that's another good question. So I think at this point we are still looking at the evidence around that, but face shields can be very protective. And if that is something that will be more feasible for kids to wear, so it's not completely covering their face, I think that's a great option. We know that the purpose of the masks is to protect against coughs and sneezes, and face shields can do that. So I think that is definitely an option.
All right. Do we have studies, data, numbers to reference about surface transfer versus airborne?
Yeah, so there are a lot of studies out there. I think earlier in the pandemic, there were a lot of concerns about the virus staying on surfaces for hours and hours, but more recent evidence and research shows that really the high risk is airborne. So recently I just listened to a webinar about somebody speaking from the CDC, who he basically said, hey, I am not worried about door handles. I'm not worried about getting my mail and collecting, my newspaper, but I don't go outside. And when I do go outside, I wear a mask. So I think transmission on surfaces is still a possibility, but extremely lower risk than airborne transmission.
All right, thank you. Does the term children mean high school students?
Yeah, that's a good question too. So in a lot of the studies that we are looking at, the definition of children tends to be less than 18 to 20 years old. But again, that varies a lot. Like I said, the risk in kids 0 to 5 is much lower than kids 16 to 18. So yeah, that does run kind of a big group, age group, but what we're saying as children is less than 18 to 20 years old.
All right. Why is the focus on temperature checks in schools if the symptoms presentations for COVID in children is GI?
Right, that's a good question. So it's not always GI symptoms. We are seeing more of that than in adults. I think adults present more commonly with fever, but kids also present with fever, and that is something that we can quantify and we can check. So I think that's why we continue with those screenings.
All right. What about neck gaiters for protection?
Neck gaiters. I am going to admit I don't know what those are.
I think they're like a wrap that you would just slip up. Like
Oh, right. Yes. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I know what didn't know the term for those. So I think those are helpful too. I mean, I think that again, we want to keep those germs from coughs and sneezes away, out of the air. So those, just like face masks, just like cloth face coverings, I think those neck gaiters can be helpful. And doing what we can do to just make the kids more comfortable. I think what they're willing to wear is what we'd like to focus on.
Okay, I think that should do it for questions. Thank you.
Okay. You're welcome.
Thank you very much, Dr. Huang. We really appreciate your perspective today. I'm going to move us to Nancy Bernard. Nancy is the consultant for health and safety at the Washington State Department of Health. She seamlessly shared her screen, so I'll just mute myself. Hi, Nancy.
Hi. Thank you. Just remember, wave frantically if you can't hear me. They tried to fix the problem, but I've been muted. The computer's muted twice since 9 o'clock. So I'm Nancy Bernard. I do the school environmental health and safety and indoor air quality programs for the Washington State Department of Health. I have a mission to protect the health and safety of all our schools. I work with public and private, all 35 local health jurisdictions who will be working with you. And we have Sammy Berg involved this morning. And I work with all the school districts and associations. Just remember, COVID is evolving and the resources do keep being updated. Hopefully they all will be clearly dated. You do have to update your browser because your browser may remember the old document. I've had that happen to me. I'm going, wait, we just posted a new document. My browser was not going to the new one. So just remember that. Currently we have childcare, youth development, and summer day camp guidance on. That will be updated, but that's the current guidance for now. And in conjunction with the OSPI reopening guide, there's the summer guidance for K-12 and fall guidance for K-12, which are really kind of a pullout of that information. And I keep reminding, I don't know if we have facility people on, but if your building's been closed down, you do have to flush your systems and get it going. Susan will be talking about food service. And we have guidance on water rec facilities, and we've talked about the cloth guidance, cloth face coverings. Excuse me a minute. Okay, this is a slide I have been using for many, many years in my teaching and training with school facility people, health departments, and school nurses and others. The science of infection control hasn't changed because we have a new virus. So these are still the basics, whether we're dealing with COVID-19 or influenza or norovirus, we still have some basic principles. We want hand washing, plain soap and water, and we want hand washing often. Cover your cough or your sneeze. Don't touch your eyes, nose, and mouth. If you can see me, I had a pediatrician say, don't take this and touch this. I think that's a really good teaching tool to use for our kids because there is no such thing as a sterile environment. Now, we would like our surgical rooms to be sterile as much as possible, but the rest of the world is going to have pathogens you cannot clean and disinfect enough. So we now know what we kind of suspected, those of us who work in this area from the beginning. Surfaces are not as important for respiratory viruses as the commercial makers of chemicals would like us to think. But that being said, we should not just think that you can touch everything and then touch our eyes, nose, and mouth without possibly giving ourselves a pathogen. Stay out of spit zone. So I coined that term a long time ago, and that's because of respiratory illnesses. And now we're getting a huge amount of focus on it. This is what's behind the 6-foot physical distancing, because we don't want to inhale or get on our eyes those respiratory droplets that contain a pathogen. Get your vaccinations, that's critical, and we all know that we won't, we won't get back to complete normal probably until we have a reliable vaccine for this virus. I've never in my 40 years in public health seen such rapid work towards a vaccine. It is really impressive. And it will be a game changer. The ventilation. Ventilation is huge, and the doctor mentioned that, and I will talk more about that. That's a big part of the work I do. The more dilution ventilation we have, the less transmission of respiratory viruses. Stay home when you're ill. Getting huge focus again. We all know there's a problem with mildly ill people going to work and going to school. And a large percentage of people with COVID-19 are asymptomatic or mildly ill. And they can transmit the virus to people they're around. You know, the rule of thumb now is within 6 feet for more than 15 minutes, you're particularly at risk of coming down with COVID-19. So keeping people home when they're ill is going to be huge. And I've been saying as schools reopen, we need options for parents who need to go to work, who don't have sick leave, do not have options other than sending their kids to school, which is what has traditionally often happened. And then support public health. So like I said, I've been using this slide for a very long time. This hasn't changed. These are my 7 basic principles for COVID prevention. Stay home when you're sick, self-isolate for 14 days if you've been exposed to somebody with COVID. That's going to be really problematic, as I already mentioned, and that's going to take a lot of focus in our communities. Wash your hands frequently with plain soap and water. Improve your outdoor ventilation. Maximize the outdoor air, and I work with facility people on this. Your new schools with your new HVAC systems, those are heating, ventilation, and AC, air conditioning's in there, although a lot of our schools have not been air conditioned. They can bring in 100% outside air through a MERV 13 filter. That's a rating system for filters, and reduce the air circulation. Really don't want air from health rooms, bathrooms, science, art, shops recirculating at all. That should already be happening. But the more we can reduce any air recirculation, the better, and the more outside air. Our problem will be our older schools. We actually still have schools in our state that the only ventilation they have is opening windows. Fine on a day like today where I am, not so great when there's a storm outside or it's the middle of winter. Those schools are going to have some issues. Keep your 6 feet between people, wear your cloth face coverings, and then at the bottom of the list, and Dr. Huang mentioned this, is the cleaning and disinfecting. What I saw before the schools closed was an absolute obsession in some areas with disinfecting. And we had a lot of respiratory irritation, asthma, and people literally getting sick because of the misuse and the overuse of disinfectants. This is a huge part of the work that I do. There's just common sense that needs to be used in this area. So this has been, this is from the New York Times. It's quite popular. People have seen it. The nice thing about COVID-19 and influenzas, they're lipid envelope viruses. These are the easiest viruses to kill or deactivate. So we'll literally break this lipid envelope apart and make this virus unable to replicate. We want fragrance-free and dye-free soaps. Lots of our schools and public facilities are moving to that. Over 30% of people are fragrance sensitive. They get the fragrance on their hands, it doesn't come off, and it can give them an asthma reaction or headache or skin sensitization. It's simply not necessary. You can now get fragrance-free soaps. Dye-free is better for the environment. Remember, anything we use goes down the drain, ends up in our storm sewers and in our waterways. Scrub for 20 seconds and no antibacterial soaps. I've been saying that since I started this job in 2003. They don't have efficacy on viruses. They have very limited efficacy. That means they don't really kill very much, particularly with this short exposure. And they're very bad for human health and the environment. So completely unnecessary. They took the triclosan out of them. 40 years, people were telling the FDA there was no efficacy studies for triclosan and it was harmful for human health and the environment. So that was removed from consumer soaps, but manufacturers love to put this label onto products because people think it's going to do something. So they put quaternary ammonia compounds in your antibacterial soaps. Quats are an asthmagen. They cause people to develop asthma. They have caused people to have asthma attacks, and they're presumed at this point to be endocrine disruptors. So plain fragrance-free soap and sinks. The local health jurisdictions who do plan review for schools and myself with the work I'm doing is we've been trying really hard to get more sinks in schools. I'm telling the school facility people if they have any extra capital project money at this time, there's two focuses for COVID. More sinks in the public areas. This is in a cafeteria. This is in a cafeteria. So that actually might be a classroom, but I've seen them in cafeterias. This is as you come into a cafeteria. It's only one, but we need more. And then the ventilation systems need work. So we need more sinks and more time. My children were little during the E. coli outbreak from Jack in the Box, and we had children who actually died from what we call secondary transmission of the E. coli. That's oral fecal, because kids weren't washing their hands. You get the feces under the fingernails. It contaminates something else that other kids pick up. Schools were actually taking the time to wash hands and wash them thoroughly. We need to go back to that. Hand washing, big focus. My nephews know how I feel, and they sent this to me. I guess it's going the rounds of the internet, but it gave me a good laugh a couple months ago when this first started. So hand sanitizers. Those of you who have heard me talk before know that I have been trying to actually reduce the use of hand sanitizers in schools for a number of reasons. They're not effective on dirty hands, and kids tend to have dirty hands. They're not effective on norovirus or our other enterics, which have been a real problem in our schools. It's a flammable poison. We do have poisonings with this. It needs to be fragrance-free. That being said, I know in the midst of this pandemic, people are wanting to use hand sanitizers, and they will come back, but they need to control it. They need to be fragrance-free. Again, that, 1 in 10, well, you see different numbers, but maybe 3 kids in any classroom can have asthma. Staff can have asthma. We need to read, and there's fragrance sensitivities. So it must be alcohol-based. None of these other products that are out there that are marketed, these have never been supported by public health or the research. And again, remember these quaternary ammonia compounds are asthmagens. Really the lowest effective disinfectant available. Alcohol will kill the SARS-CoV-2 virus. So if it can reach it, you need enough to actually keep the hands wet with the rubbing for a good 20 seconds or more to reach through the mucus to the virus to kill it. That's the same with flu. So again, I know these will be in the schools again, but let's use them with common sense and remember that after going to the bathroom, before preparing food, before eating, after being on the playground, it must be real hand washing. Electric dryers are in the news again. This is actually a very old slide. I've never recommended them for schools or public facilities. They do just blow everything around. They're time consuming. I want people to wash their hands, and they need to be able to not wipe them on their pants when they're done. And the newer dryers that are much faster can actually hurt your hearing. There's been studies on that. So we want to stick with the paper towels. Schools need to have an infection control plan. I don't have time to go into details this morning on that, but we do have information and resources for schools on this, and it is mentioned in the reopening guide. It's not new. We've been talking about this for a very long time. This is the one of the programs that I really recommend schools consider. California Department of Health became very concerned with the number of custodial and maintenance people developing asthma. Our occupational medicine clinic at the University of Washington is also concerned with this. are two disinfectants that have traditionally been used that can cause asthma and cause asthma reactions, the quats and bleach. So this is a really simple, easy to use guide that was beta tested in California schools to develop a program that's much safer for asthma and basically health in general. No fogging, no misting. I don't care what people say, you're not going to kill anything floating in the air by spraying chemicals in the air. You're just going to cause respiratory irritation, sensitization, asthma, and other bad health effects. And so no sprays, don't believe the labels. They're usually making claims they can't support. They're dangerous. No, no, no. Ventilation. The code minimum since 1991 in our state is 15 cubic feet per minute per person. If our schools are actually delivering that, you have fairly decent air quality as long as they're doing the source control, not using any of the things that are really irritating to people, like the so-called air fresheners, plug-ins, scentsies, candles, essential oils, etc., all of which are not good for human health and cause problems in our schools. So 15 cubic feet per minute per person, code minimum for the most part, unless you have a really old school, because you don't have to meet the new codes until you modernize. We do have schools not at that level. The research is showing that 20 cubic feet per minute per person outside air, you get better test results and better health, less absenteeism. So we're really encouraging schools to at least move to the 20, but in COVID, try and actually have 100% outside air coming in. So that's something we're working with facility people on and developing guidance. Since the whole wildfire smoke stuff and some of the research that's been going on, we're at moving schools towards higher filtration of the outside air. If you have smoke, either from any kind of wood burning, whether it's wildfire smoke or campfires, like somebody started at 12:30 last night and woke me up in my suburban neighborhood, or wood burning, or traffic-related air pollutants, or air pollution, we really want to filter that. And if you have any air recirculating, the research is showing this will help reduce the recirculation of these floating viruses. We have some. Remember, COVID is primarily respiratory droplet being within that 6 feet, but we do have some percentage, and there's still research going on, that does become aerosolized and does float longer. That's why the dilution ventilation is so important. And then we have a lot of guidance on decluttering your classroom, making it easier to clean, and reducing the dirt and particles. This is 2 resources for choosing safer disinfectants. That's been a huge part of our work with schools for the last 10 years. There are 2 products primarily that we recommend as safer disinfectants: the alcohol-based disinfectants and the peroxide-based disinfectants. I don't generally recommend wipes because they're, that's a lot of garbage and a lot of expense that schools can't have. It's better to buy products and use a microfiber cloth. But if you're doing wipes, because people are a little bit concerned, even though we know that surfaces are not a very important means of transmission, if you're doing wipes, you can get alcohol-based wipes, you can get hydrogen peroxide-based wipes. They're safer and more effective than the traditional quaternary ammonia-based wipes that have been out there for a long time. Quats are your least effective disinfectant and the highest hazard besides bleach. And you can get them fragrance-free. So we have these resources available. This is a poster I did that's available for schools. I have all these resources on my website. These are my healthy air quality tips for schools that talks a lot about these issues. Long before COVID, we were trying to create really healthy classrooms. We have the OSPI Infectious Disease Control Guide, Appendix 8, as procedures for dealing with a lot of these issues, and more of my resources. So that's a really brief summary of my information and work. I'd be happy to answer questions.
All right, Nancy, we have some questions for you. Can someone please clarify the role of local plan reviews by the local health jurisdictions? From what we've heard, we don't have any official role in that capacity.
There is a State Board of Health WAC. It's existed since at least 1960. It requires school districts to have local health jurisdiction must do site approval. So wherever you're going to build a school or modernize a school, there are standards that have to be met from a public health perspective. There's plan review. There's pre-opening inspections. And about 10 of our local health jurisdictions out of 35 actually do routine inspections. Thurston County Health Department inspects schools annually. Sorry, I'm about my voice. This was the campfire that woke me up last night.
Okay, we have a question about hand sanitizer. Will those be in schools, and is it efficient to thoroughly rub your hands and make it dry before it's legitimate?
I think I heard that before I got muted.
Oh,
Hand sanitizer will work on relatively clean hands for COVID. It will not work after you've gone to the bathroom. It's not going to remove feces. It's not going to get underneath your fingernails. It's not going to stop the transmission of your enteric diseases like norovirus that shuts down schools. It's not something you want to do before you eat or after you've been playing out on the playground. So it's, you know, if you cough or sneeze on your hand and you can't go wash your hands, then yeah, you could use hand sanitizer if you use enough of it. But let's not pretend it's going to replace hand washing.
okay. Is it important to get toilet lids due to aerosolization of COVID or norovirus if flushed without a lid?
It would be really nice. We don't know how much actual transmission. I'm sure you've all seen that you do shed viruses in your feces, whether it's a respiratory virus or not. Whether you're getting, can inhale enough particles to actually make you sick, we don't know. With noro, yes. I think that there are plans out there that would move towards better exhaust ventilation in public restrooms. I don't see us having the economics to move to lids in those public facilities yet, or those ventilation systems. That's just not going to happen. I think you're in a bathroom a short enough period of time that it's probably not a really important means of transmission. That being said, you know, yes, if you had a lid, I would use a lid. But most public facilities don't, mostly because of the expense and the vandalism. So I would say focus on flushing the toilet, washing your hands thoroughly, and leaving the bathroom.
All right, thank you. And that's it for our questions.
Okay,
Thank you so much, Nancy.
you're welcome.
Before we move on, I just want to remind people, some folks have not renamed themselves. And when we move into breakouts, it's really essential that you do that. So if you haven't done that yet, if you find your picture on the screen and hover in the upper right-hand corner, or if you go to the participants list, pull it up and find yourself in that list and hover over it, you're going to look for a button that says More. Click on that. It'll give you the option to rename yourself. The naming convention is your county district name with no spaces in there. County district name. We really appreciate your help with that. Our next speaker is Susan Shelton, also from the Washington State Department of Health. Susan is going to, somebody's email's on the screen. Susan is going to talk with us about food safety guidance. Are you able to share your screen, Susan? There you go. Welcome.
Good morning. Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. I'm excited to be here today, and I love following Nancy. She and I work together, obviously, at the Department of Health, but on top of that, she and I have very consistent messages. So she always does a wonderful job, and I concur with her on all the things she mentioned. But I wanted to talk today a little bit about food service. For those of you that don't know me, again, my name is Susan Shelton. I'm with the Washington State Department of Health Food Safety Program. My 20th year in public health. Before that, I actually went to school for physical therapy. I used to teach micro and anatomy physiology. And I, yes?
You sound like you're underwater.
So it'll help if you slow down a little, but also there's a bit of static. I don't know if you can, if you're far away from your microphone or.
No, would you rather I call in?
No, I think if you can speak slowly, it would help. Want to try that?
Okay,
You were fine this morning when we practiced.
Yes, I'm not sure what's changed. I will try and speak slower.
Actually, however you just moved your head helped a lot. So just freeze your head.
Okay. So again, I've been in public health for 20 years. The majority of my time has been at local health, and I'm based in the Tri-Cities area. So I saw quite a few people from Benton County. That's where I'm based. I'm here in Kennewick. Just wanted to mention, you know, we have covered both with the doctor's presentation and with Nancy's presentation, a lot of these controls that we're using now for COVID-19. And as both presented, it's a lot of information that we've been using for over the last hundreds of years about how we reduce the risk of illness. But I wanted to draw out this concept from OSHA. It's a protections that we use for employees, and it's called the hierarchy of controls. But I think it's a really good visual to help us understand all these changes that we make, these controls that we put in, and to coordinate them and organize them in ways to show how they're protective for us. So I wanted to really highlight this chart in particular and run through it real quickly with everyone so we could all kind of be on the same page. Again, it's designed for reducing the risk of employees so that they don't get injured on the job. But I think we can also use it in our discussions and in our line of work. So the first one that you'll see, you'll notice it's an inverted pyramid. And the design behind that is that the ones that are the most effective, the controls that are going to do the best job for us are going to be up at the top. Then they're going to narrow down as they become least effective down to the bottom. So again, the key is that it's an inverted pyramid. And our first primary control that we always search for whenever we're trying to reduce risk is elimination. And elimination in times of COVID is going to physically remove the hazard entirely. And in times of COVID, that's going to be what we're doing right now. We're staying home. That's going to reduce our risk because we're not going to be exposed to the virus. It's virtual meetings like we're doing right now. So we're all meeting together, but we're not in the same room. And so we've reduced our risk and we've eliminated it. Again, that's not something that we can do if we're going to open up schools. So we're about to go down the chart a little bit. So let's look at the next level that we try to do. Substitution, we try to replace the hazard that we have. And in the case of COVID, that's more than likely going to be a vaccine. We're going to search for a vaccine that we can then use that so that we don't get infected with the actual virus. Again, before September of this year, we're probably not going to have access to a vaccine. So let's go down the hierarchy one more step. The next one we have is engineering controls. Engineering controls are designed to isolate the person from the hazard. And we use physical and mechanical means in order to do that. So they take time to produce and implement. But once they're instituted, they're actually better than the two ones below that because it's harder to defeat them. So what are some of our engineering controls that we have for COVID? We have the EPA registered disinfectants, those chemicals that we use. We have high efficiency air filters. We increase the ventilation rates of indoor air. If we institute those kind of concepts, then the people that are inside those rooms or inside those buildings should be better protected, even though they did no actual effort of their own. We also put up barriers, partitions, ropes. We separate people. We use sneeze guards. We use plexiglass screens. All of those concepts are designed that we have to produce, we have to make them and implement them. But again, an engineering control puts that barrier between us and the actual germ that we're trying to stay healthy from. So
Susan, I'm sorry to interrupt you one more time. I'm going to ask everybody, including you, Susan, to turn off your video. That'll free up some bandwidth for the audio. So if everybody could just do that for this presentation, that would be really helpful. And then go ahead when you're ready, Susan.
Okay, well, sorry about that. Maybe it's my Eastern Washington connection here. So hopefully this audio is better. So the next one is going to go down again another level, and these are the administrative controls that we have. And administrative controls change the way the person works. So these involve changes to procedures, behaviors, policies. They're easier to implement than the controls above on the top of the pyramid, but they actually require compliance of people. So they're often the solution that we bridge the gap until we can have more effective controls in place. So some administrative controls that we have are things like social distancing procedures, training employees, using floor markings to promote distancing. This is when we talk to people and say cough and sneeze inside your sleeve. We talk about don't touch your eyes, your nose, your mouth, making sure that you have proper hand hygiene, you wash your hands. We tell people to wash hands. We ask people to watch their health. Those are all administrative controls. So again, all the recommendations that we have that are in this group, it really relies on people modeling proper procedures, making sure that we are clear about how we do education, maybe putting up posters to remind people. All of these controls in administrative section, which are the primary ones that we're using, are really designed to get people to change their behavior. So as much as we can model it and try to remember it and make sure we're practicing it is what's really key. And then the final control that we have is personal protective equipment. So this is the PPE. These are similar to administrative controls because they can be implemented quickly if it's available. But again, it's going to be our last kind of resort because it really depends on compliance and proper use. And so often there's a lot of training that's involved with this as well. So again, I wanted to just highlight this so that as you look through these controls that you use and that we're doing throughout schools, it'll help us kind of determine how much we need to make sure that we're training people and how much we can do just by changing our engineering concepts. Let's talk specifically about food service. One of the key components that we have is we still have not seen that COVID-19, the virus that causes COVID-19, we don't see that it can spread through food. So most of the food safety concepts that we use will maintain the same. But we have a couple of items that we'd like to focus on to help us protect against COVID-19. The first one is hand washing. Nancy really details well about the importance of hand washing, but we're going to throw in that we're looking to do it before and after meals. So you do it before so we don't get sick from our food, so we don't contaminate ourselves. But then we do it after because now we've potentially gotten some saliva or things on our hands that we could then spread. So again, we're really going to try to get people to wash their hands before and after meals. We are also considering hand gel, and we recognize that's something that hasn't been primarily used in schools. It's not something that we usually recommend in food service, but it is effective against COVID-19 and coronavirus. So again, if it's going to assist with reducing the risk of the virus, we will be encouraging it. Next one we're going to talk about is to reduce the concept of buffet style. So cafeteria style, where you have the kitchen workers serving the meals, that's going to be okay. As long as you're going through self-service, it's not recommended. So again, look for
Susan,
staff.
I'm not, Susan, I'm sorry. I'm not sure if you just moved your head or what happened, but we lost you almost completely.
You know,
And also,
can I
everybody else, please mute yourself.
I haven't moved my head, so can I call in? Would that be better?
Christy, what do you think? Worth a try?
Why
Why don't you go? Okay, why don't you?
Okay,
Oh, go ahead.
But we
what
would.
if is this better? Can I, is
Try
this
that.
working?
Yes.
Okay. Well, again, I do apologize for my connection issues. I've been on a lot of conference calls and I can appreciate the difficulty. Our next item is to reduce the shared space. One of the concepts is to really try to get students to eat inside their classrooms or outside if possible. The doctor talked about how important it is to have a lot of ventilation. Nancy talked about a lot of ventilation. So as much as we can put people outside, we're really going to shoot for that. If you do need to use a shared space, we're going to look at keeping classrooms cohorted so that they stay together, so that they don't mix and mingle with other students as much as possible. And we're going towards military or window kind of situations, again, to try to avoid the shared indoor spaces. And then we really want to mention that we're going to focus on cleaning of surfaces. So again, cleaning removes the organic matter, the food, the dirt, the items that you can see, the fats, the greases. You need to do that before you either sanitize or disinfect. We're sticking with regular sanitization in the kitchen. So food contact surfaces like forks, knives, bowls need to be sanitized following your normal procedures. The touch points, though, the items that people touch routinely, especially the students and all the rest of the staff, you want to make sure that you're using the disinfectant on those. And then really going to focus on maintaining physical distancing. And I just really want to emphasize this image is from the Grant County Health District. I think the concept is really good. And what it's showing is that every action that we do plays a role in this whole reduction of illness. And so we've talked about hand washing, physical distancing, wearing a mask, staying home when you're sick. Each of those works well, but not 100%. So when you overlap them all together, you actually have much better control. And so all of these things that we've been talking about, we really want to emphasize it's a multi-layered approach. We really want to implement all of these items to help us reduce the risk and get us back into school safely. And I really want to thank you. I appreciate that my audio was difficult, but I do want to encourage you, if you have additional questions, to ask them now, and I can chime in through chat. Or you can also contact me through Lynn or the ESD, or also directly through my work email. And again, I thank you very much.
All right.
Thank you. Thank you
ahead.
very much, Susan. Barb, go ahead. Do you have some questions in the chat?
I am not seeing any questions. I think we just had a lot of audio difficulties.
Yep, for sure. So I apologize for that, everybody. And if you want to put questions in the chat for Susan now, she has offered to answer them via chat. Her handouts will be on our website along with all the other handouts and PowerPoints. There will be a recording there as well, but I'll take this opportunity to tell you we're going to close caption it, and we don't know quite how long that will take. So you'll probably see the handouts before you see the video recording. Thank you so much, Susan. And if you just keep an eye on that for a little bit and see if questions come up for you. And I want to introduce our final speaker, Jim Lawrence from Labor and Industries. You able to share your screen, Jim?
There we go.
Nice, thanks.
Everybody see it?
Yep.
Okay. Well, I'm Jim Lawrence. I'm with Labor and Industries. Actually, I am the Region 4 Consultation Manager with DOSH. I know that's a mouthful, but DOSH is the Division of Occupational Safety and Health. We're just a division of Labor and Industries. Region 4 is Southwest Washington, and I'm with the Consultation Division. I'm sure everybody's heard of compliance, who writes the tickets. We're actually the opposite side of the coin. We are more educators, sort of like you guys. Excuse me, I got some allergy stuff going on here. But my presentation today is really going to come right from the Reopening Washington Schools 2020 District Planning Guide, pages 24 through 26, if you have that in front of you. And what I'm going to be speaking to today is employee regulation. Let's see if this go to the next slide. And it won't go to the next slide. Let me try this. I can't get it to go to the next. Oh, there we go. Okay, now it goes. Apologize for that. So the agenda today, I'm going to kind of give a brief overview of the requirements for the document and give you some guidance to those requirements. And at the end, I'll have a few resources for you as well too, and then obviously some questions. But I want to tell you up front, this is more of an industrial hygienist type issue that we have, and I'm not an industrial hygienist, but I'll do the best I can to answer questions at the end. So I think to reiterate what everybody else said, just practice good hygiene. Follow hand washing for 20 seconds. Good cough, sneeze etiquette into the inside of your elbow. Avoid touching eyes, nose, or mouth with unwashed hands. That's primary roots for this virus. Avoid close contact with people who are sick. Isolate yourself. If you know others around you may be sick. Increase frequency of facility cleaning, and this is going to be, look at commonly touched surfaces. So I think the previous presenters have talked quite a bit about what type of surfaces probably need to be cleaned more often. So standards, we don't really have, a COVID-19 standard, but what we do have is, first and foremost, is the Washington Industrial Safety and Health Act, or otherwise known as the WSHA Act, that requires that all workers are protected from recognized safety and health hazards, and this obviously is a recognized health hazard. Now, we do have some standards that do apply: the accident prevention program, the employee training, personal protective equipment, housekeeping and sanitation. And if you're going to do any type of cleaning, you'll probably be using some chemicals, so that will be the hazardous communication standard that will apply. And if anybody does become ill, then if it's on the job or they become hospitalized, then you have to fill out your OSHA record keeping form to reflect that. One of the things too is that we do have a standard that protects workers from biological hazards, and it's in our general duty clause, but we do have a standard that does apply to this. So with that being in mind, I'm going to go through the requirements. I'm going to refer back to these other standards I just briefly went through, like the accident prevention program and the personal protective equipment program, or standards as well too. So one of the things we want you to do is develop a COVID-19 plan. Well, if you already have an accident prevention program, it's going to be a lot like that. But we want you to develop a plan just specific for COVID, that you have an addendum to your AP, what we call an APP, accident prevention program. So think about how you want to prevent this disease from being spread throughout your schools. You might start with, the health screenings that are on the previous pages of this guideline. I think it's page 17 is where it starts. But how are you going to screen people? How are you going to prevent people from getting sick while you're screening people? What doors are you going to let people in? Who's going to be, doing that monitoring for you? What type of records are you going to be keeping? Think about that kind of stuff. What personal protective equipment are you going to need? What happens when you need to clean up an area? What if you can't social distance? How is that going to work? So you need to put that in your plan and have it as specific as possible. Then you want to educate workers in a language that they understand about that plan, so they can understand what their part is in preventing the disease, how to keep themselves from getting COVID-19. Maintain at least a 6-foot spacing at all times between staff, students, and anybody else that might be walking into your school. And I can think of like suppliers, maybe you might have contractors come in to work on something. Parents might be another people that would fall in this other category. So think about that too, that, how are you going to handle those folks coming into your schools? So then limit people in closed areas like classrooms or lunchroom. What are you going to do? I mean, some things that you can do is stagger breaks and work shifts. You can stagger recesses with the students. So when that's not feasible, then what can you do? And I think as Susan talked about, then you can start looking at some of the other types of stuff where the administrative controls don't work. Look at engineering controls or PPE. So barriers is obviously an engineering control that you could use, or you could use certain types of PPE, and we'll talk about that. Now, PPE, you all should have a PPE hazard assessment already. So this would be something that you would, again, go through and review that and then update that for the COVID-19. When are you going to need face shields? When are you going to need, a cloth mask? When you might need a respirator? When are you going to need gloves? So think about those kinds of things, and make that part of your program. You're required to provide PPE at no cost. So I know this can be an expense, and I'm getting questions now, what happens if they lose it? Well, unfortunately, you're going to have to replace it. And this includes the gloves, the face shields, the coverings, masks, anything you might need. Now, one of the things in that document, it talks about schools being a medium risk. So if you truly are a medium risk where you're within that 6-foot zone for several minutes a day, several times a day, a face cloth is not going to be adequate. You're going to need at least a dust mask or what they call a KN95. Now, these aren't respirators, but they're one step above a cloth mask and like one step below the N95s or respirators. So think about that. And that's going to be another probably expense. And I know folks are having trouble finding some of these dust masks or KN95s as well too. So, think about how can you social distance first, and then, put in restrict or barriers, or, do as much as you can to keep people from coming together. The other thing you might think about is disposable gloves, especially when you're using shared items, such as tools or supplies. And I know this came up with our construction folks with taking temperatures on site, because you got the thermometer people are using. So, think about that as people are coming in. Are you going to have disposable gloves that people can use? Are you going to sanitize your thermometer? Think about that as part of your plan. Next, you're going to need to designate a COVID-19 supervisor. So, and you're going to need a COVID-19 supervisor for each school. Now, this person has authority to sort of to look at the overall program to make sure it's working. It's more of a performance standard. So we kind of recommend that this person be a member of the management staff, so they have the authority to make changes to the plan if necessary. Either they can make the change or make recommendations to purchase additional PPE, or make changes to the plan to make sure that you are doing what you need to do. Now, with that being said, a worker may refuse to perform an unsafe task, including hazards that by being exposed to recognized hazards. Now, and it's unlawful for an employer to take adverse action against a person who is under one of these safety protected activities by the law. So we'll try to work with your folks. I know I had a person who, even though we supplied the adequate PPE for them to be in the field, they wanted a step above. They wanted a respirator. So we made the accommodation to get them into a respirator. So, and that's not just simply putting somebody in. You have to have a medical examination and they have to go through a fit test as well too. So try to think, you know, how can you make people comfortable? Because some people are not going to be real comfortable working in a facility that may have COVID or be exposed to COVID. So employees can remove themselves due to the COVID exposure. So if they're in a vulnerable group, like age 65 or above, or they have a serious health condition, or they have people at home and family members that have a serious health condition or part of a vulnerable group, you know, look at what accommodations you can do. You know, and if you can't accommodate them in any way, I guess there are different leaves that are available, or even if last resort unemployment benefits. And I refer you to the governor's proclamation of 2046 was discusses this, and also get maybe together with your HR person to see what reasonable accommodations you can make. Okay, so you want to screen employees, students, and others who will be attending the school for more than 15 minutes for signs and symptoms of COVID. You want to do it at the start of every shift, including, you know, temperature taking. And you know, there's a list of things on pages 17 through 18 of requirements that for what you need to do to screen folks coming in. And think about how you're going to do this screening. How are you going to do, you know, are you going to have lines of people waiting to get in? You know, what doors are you going to put them through? Are you going to be just one door through the whole school, or is it going to be multiple doors? You know, who's going to be taking the temperature taking? How are you going to do that? So think about that, and then make sure, like, sick employees and students stay home or immediately go home if they appear to be sick. And cordon off any areas where an employee or students with probable or definite where they've had, it's been recognized that they have COVID, it's been tested, and you know, we just had a person in our Tumwater office tested positive for COVID. So when you have to go in to do that type of sanitation where somebody has tested positive or has a high probability of being tested positive, then this is a high transmission risk, and you need an N95 mask, a respirator, and a face shield. So if you're going to go to that level of respiratory protection, these folks doing this type of cleaning are going to have medical evaluations and respirator fit tests. So you might want to start thinking about who this might be, you know, and get prepared that, you know, so you have these people ready when you need them. So you don't want to be scrambling at the last second trying to get respirators or masks and fit tests, because it could take some time. So have those folks ready to go now. So all employees are required to wear at least a face covering, and this includes students, that covers the mouth and nose. And anybody that's going to be, any other individuals going to be in the school facility more than 15 minutes are required to use face coverings as well too. So, you know, think about who those other folks might be and make sure that they know when they come on to the school grounds that they're going to have a face mask or at least a higher level of protection over a face mask as well too. So what happens if people can't wear a mask? So can the employee provide that service remotely? That's something to consider. You know, or if it's a student, can they receive the services remotely? I know, like, probably all of us are been teleworking. We've been using Zoom and Skype to get our work done. So that's something to consider as well too. Now, the use of face shields, I know this was brought up earlier. Now, DOSH does not recognize a face shield as a protective barrier. So face shields in our world, you'll need a face shield to protect the eye entry, but you're going to need a mask if you just use the face shield as well too. So we want that double protection. So if somebody can't obviously wear a mask, the face shield isn't going to be adequate. So they're going to need some sort of a barrier, like a plexiglass barrier. We're even looking at people who work in cubicles. If the cubicle walls are high enough that somebody can't breathe over them, look over them. So that's something to consider as well too. So the other thing you can do is maybe this person can work alone, like a groundskeeper where they could be outside all by themselves. So our definition of somebody that's working alone is, we just recently changed the definition, but it has to be somebody who truly is alone and that there's no expectation of human contact. So if there is some sort of expectation where they're going to have human contact, where people are going to get closer than the 6 feet, then you have to have them in a mask or remove them from the site. So I got some additional resources here. I think all these are going to be shared with folks. DOH, there's L&I resources, CDC, OSHA. And I think like everybody else has said, these things change constantly. And this week, I know we've had a couple of changes or proposed changes to our guidelines as well too. So, the answer you get from us today could very well change tomorrow. So try to check back with our resources. I think one of the things, the document that was passed out earlier, I believe it was yesterday, it's called Masks for the Task, and that's going to be revamped. We're working on that to bring it up with our current expectations. So I'm going to leave you with consultation services, and this, again, we're broke down into the 6 regions. Each region here is color-coded. For ESD 113, you're in region 4, and that's my region, and there's my desk phone number. So, and if you need to contact me any other way other than the phone number, you could probably go through Lynn Nelson as well too. She has my email address, so that'd be a good way for you to contact me as well too. So I'll try to answer questions. Again, I'm not an industrial hygienist, so it's just not my expertise, but go ahead and give me what questions you do have.
Okay, we have a few. We need help with clarity on what our regulations are that we must comply with. There seems to be some inconsistencies people have heard this morning.
Yeah, I hear you, because you have DOH requirements, you have, now remember with us, we're not looking at students, we're looking at employees. So we're looking at the teachers, the staff members, et cetera. And ours could be a little bit different from the Department of Health. And I know with children, their ability to get COVID or pass it along can be different than adults. So we may have a higher standard for adults just because of that. So that's one thing to keep in mind. So when you contact us, we're going to give you what information we have for adults and what we think is probably best for employers, employees.
All right, thank you. Would a face shield be the same thing as a plexiglass barrier to reduce risks, so they can check a temp with just a face shield and a cloth mask?
No, face shield, we're looking at a total barrier where you can't. Well, our guidance from my management is that a face shield still allows air to pass up underneath it so you can actually breathe it in. So that in itself is not adequate. You would need a face mask. And if you're going to have somebody probably closer than 6 feet on a constant basis or several times a day for a few minutes at a time, you probably have to go to a higher protection than even a cloth face mask.
Okay. Can high risk or extremely high risk activities simply use a medically grade mask, such as a surgical mask with a face shield on top of it versus an N95, which are hard to get right now?
That's a good question. I think I would defer to one of my H's or our technical services people. Maybe we can get that one written down and I can get back to the person.
Okay. Let's see. I'm seeking minimum requirements for workers in my organization. What are we required to do for our workers? If you have a bullet list, that'd be preferable.
Start with our 800 standard. And it's quite a thick standard, so there's a lot of stuff to cover. And realize that there's a number of other standards that are above and beyond that 800 standard that you could fall under. So probably the best thing, I think, advice would be contact me and we can get a consultant set up with you. Now we're free of charge. There's no fines. It's by law, we cannot tell compliance what we found. So, and that would actually kill our program if we did that anyway. So we try very, very hard to keep compliance totally. In fact, there is a pretty firewall between us and the compliance.
All right. What kind of complaints will make you come down and check out our school for compliance?
For compliance, right now it's positive cases of COVID. If we got workers that are falling ill, and those are being referred to our compliance division. Or employees as well too, that their employer's not following the guidelines.
Okay. There's a few questions about certain apps that are available for screening process. Does LNI recommend those to be used for parents to check in their student?
We don't recommend anything. I would check with the school to see how they're going to handle, whether they will accept it. Right now, actually, there's, with LNI, for us, they're talking about an app, using one. I'm not sure which app that is. I just got an email this morning and I haven't had a chance to check it out. So that would be a good question we could run by our technical services folks. Because right now we're being pretty lenient on some stuff, but and it goes case by case and industry by industry. So that'd be a good question. Maybe I could jot down or have you record, and I can run by our technical services folks and see what they're going to accept for schools.
Okay, great. Just a couple more questions. What if we have staff refusing to use PPE in accordance with regulations?
Now this is where it gets a bit dicey, because we're telling folks, you know, you would treat it the same as you, let's say you have in a shop or something where a teacher would have to wear safety goggles, or groundskeeper would have to put on gloves, or they have to use, you know, maintenance person would have to use fall protection. You would treat this COVID and mask use the same as you would any other refusal to wear PPE. Check with your HR people and see what your disciplinary policy is for that.
All right. Well, thank you, Jim.
That's it.
That will do for questions.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Jim. I appreciate that. I know everybody is ready for a break. I want to just give you a little lay of the land for when you come back. When we come back, we're going to be in county groups. It's really important when you take your break that you leave your meeting open. Don't leave the meeting. So shut off your audio, shut off your video, do what you need to do, but don't leave the meeting and come back, because it will create some complications going into break rooms. We have both a county lead and a nurse question runner in each group, and I just want to tell you who those people are. What that means is that Jim and Susan and Nancy and Dr. Huang will be in a administrative room, and if you have a question come up in your group, the nurse who's assigned to your group can pop out, come to us, ask the question, and bring it back to your group. So in no particular order, for Mason County, we have Mason County's medical director, Dr. Daniel Stein, who will be leading, giving you an update about county specific information and then doing questions and answers with you. Michelle Peterson is a school nurse in that region, and she'll be our question runner. In Pacific County, we have Dr. Stephen Krager, who's the medical director there, and he'll be leading your group. Your group is small. I do not have a nurse in your group. So if somebody in Pacific County wants to nominate themselves to be a question runner, that would be great. In Lewis County, we have JP Anderson from Lewis County Public Health, and Rob Baziza, the nurse, who will be running questions back and forth. In Thurston County, we have Sammy Berg from Thurston County Public Health, and Heidi Collins is the nurse who will pop back and forth. And in Grays Harbor, we do not have county health representation. I'll talk about that in the meeting. So I'm going to be your county health representation, and Kim Royer is going to help me with questions. Some of you are not from ESD 113 counties. So you'll be going into a separate breakout room, and Barb will join you there with some further information. So we're going to take about not about a 15-minute break. It's 32. We're going to come back at 10:45. You should come back and be in your breakout groups. If you're not, please be patient. It means Christy's still working on it, okay? So go ahead and shut off your camera and microphone and come on back at 10:45. After that county group meeting, we'll bring you back all together, answer any questions, and then break out into a different breakout group. See you in 15 minutes, everybody.